Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today, I am just going to summarize everything we canonically know about the robots and the most likely items that we can surmise from this information. There will be major spoilers ahead, so click away now if you plan on watching either Season 1 or Season 2. So the first data point we have is Scarecrow crashing to Earth in the Christmas Star incident. In order for a ship and pilot like Scarecrow to crash, something had to happen to him before he impacted. Probably someone or something shot Scarecrow down before or just after he had opened up the wormhole, leading to the crash and the damage, because nothing else followed Scarecrow to Earth that we know of. There wasn't an invading alien fleet on his tail, but he clearly had taken some major damage that caused the crash. So presumably that happened before he opened up the wormhole. He made it through the wormhole and it closed behind him. At this point, the government of Canada, with help from their nosy southern neighbors in the form of a charming ginger pirate type, investigates the crash and finds a horribly damaged Scarecrow. They summon the world leader in robotics to communicate with him, Ben Adler. Scarecrow interacts with Adler and shows such behavior and communication that he convinces Adler that he is a sentient sapient being. During this time, Scarecrow forms a deep friendship with Adler, and the Alpha Centauri project proceeds to build the Resolute around the remnants of Scarecrow's crashed ship. Now, the timeline gets a little vague here, but the implication from everything we've seen is that Adler and Scarecrow were still friends when they at least made the first several jumps to Alpha Centauri. The control room does not have a built-in holding area, and the restraints look like they're more for support than actual restraint. The control room only has a mobile holding area, the rolling cage, leaving the implication that at first Scarecrow wanted to be there, which makes sense. Scarecrow was an astronaut, and this deal got him a whole new ship after he had crashed his on an alien planet. And Scarecrow would have been helping out his friend Adler and helping to rectify the damage that he had done to Earth. At some point between the formation of their friendship and the 24th mission, however, something goes horribly wrong. From the way Adler talked, Scarecrow's behavior suddenly changed from that of a reasoning sapient being to that of a purely code-driven machine, culminating in Scarecrow's attack on Adler. From the way Adler talked, it appeared to Adler to be some sort of self-preservation code, so we can assume Scarecrow thought he was, or was, in some kind of danger and reacted to it, in the process injuring Adler. Now, the show's main theme with the robots has been that everyone has been wrong about their motivations at pretty much every point, except for John Robinson, who can figure out a little bit based on being a warrior himself and being able to analyze the situation and figure out what a warrior would do in that situation. So it seems pretty safe to say that Adler misread that incident. But Adler is presented as the world-leading machine intelligence specialist, so we can assume that Scarecrow did undergo a very dramatic change. Also, as his friend, Adler wouldn't have wanted to believe that Scarecrow was just a machine. He would have wanted to continue believing Scarecrow was a person. Scarecrow would have had to overcome both Adler's professional training and Adler's emotional bias, so we can assume that Scarecrow's behavior would have convinced pretty much anyone that he was a machine. That all the signs were there that Scarecrow was just a machine. What would have caused this change in Scarecrow's behavior? Well, there is the obvious, as the show has proven the robots to be sentient and sapient, with the processing power located in the upper body and their power source located in the lower body. Well, Scarecrow had taken massive physical trauma to both his upper and lower body. I think whatever their robotic equivalent of brain damage was is a pretty solid bet that he has it to a large degree, and that his power core is damaged. So during this time frame, Scarecrow is suffering from brain damage and essentially starvation. Any doctor at Walter Reed Medical will tell you that soldiers with brain damage and or starvation are not acting normal, that they will start falling back on instinctive aggression and defensive reactions that actually makes them quite dangerous. That's why they have special wards for people with the severe brain damage. Also, given the show's repetition of the idea that when Robot Robinson defies Will's orders, it is for his own safety, we can also assume that Scarecrow had sensed something dangerous approaching the Resolute, or the Resolute approaching something dangerous, and expressed defiance and panic in a brain-damaged way. However it happened, Scarecrow had convinced everyone, including the one person in the universe who deeply didn't want to believe it, that he was a machine to be managed, not a person to be talked to it by the 24th mission when the Resolute is stormed, and presumably several missions before that. Now, as we get all the information in flashbacks, it's hard to say the exact timeline, but one of the blue with gold trim alien robots storms the Resolute and goes on an absolute murder rampage through the hallways. This wasn't just about retrieving the engine or even rescuing Scarecrow. That robot was murdering people at random even as they were trying to flee. That was an extermination run. And presumably, the robot was headed for the engine compartment to get the engine, as that is the only thing missing from the Resolute in Season 2. Again, the timeline is shaky, but we know that the attacking murder robot didn't make it to the engine room because the Resolute was able to jump with all of the fleeing Jupiters. Presumably, when the jump happened, the murder bot was still on the way to the engine room. Now, that jump had to have been all Scarecrow. This is the main reason I think he was still on the colonist side at this point, even if he was trying to argue with them about when and where to go. He might have just been fleeing himself from the blue robots. We have no proof that the methane planet robots and the amber planet robots work together. But when making a desperate jump away from an enemy, Scarecrow didn't jump the Resolute to Earth, which would have given the enemy the location of the homeworld. He didn't jump to Alpha Centauri, which would have given the enemy the location of the colony. He didn't jump back to his own homeworld where he could have been rescued and received medical attention. He didn't jump to any of the places in the two galaxies where he would have been fine while the colonists and the Jupiters perished. Scarecrow jumped the Resolute and all of the Jupiters to a human-friendly planet where the Jupiters could find everything they needed to rest and regroup, including methane-rich fuel sources, before coming back to the Resolute. No matter how bitter he is over his own treatment, Scarecrow was still at this point doing his best to take care of the colonists. The show makes quite a point over how much like winning the lottery it was to have landed on a human-friendly planet. Now, back to the murder robot who stormed the ship. When that jump was made, Robot Robinson had to have been on the alien ship, which makes sense. He's a pilot after all, and his legs at least were found with the wreckage. However, the bot that was doing all the murdering was headed towards the engine compartment when Dr. Smith stole the jacket off of the real Dr. Smith. Depending on how long it took her to get to his Jupiter, and assuming the real Dr. Smith would have been fairly close to his Jupiter, that barely gave the murdering robot time to get from where she saw him back to his ship in time to be on the ship when it went through the hole, suggesting that the robot that Dr. Smith at least saw murdering people might not have been Robot Robinson. However, if it wasn't Robot Robinson, then where did the murdering robot go after the jump? Again, the engine was still in the Resolute long enough to jump the Resolute to the danger system. Curious, I'm just not sure that we can be at this point that Robot Robinson was the murder bot from the given information, and this show does like its plot twists. We next see Robot Robinson's legs and power core at the site of his crashed ship. They start to move towards his upper body, suggesting that his upper half had only just woken up to some of the legs when Will showed up. He seems to attack Will, but whether this was a true attack or merely a warning shot is unclear. Robot Robinson is damaged at this point, but Will should have been an easy target. Will was backing up blindly towards him, and all Robot Robinson would have had to do would be to wait another second or two for Will to be in range and to have made it a quick killing shot. Robot might have misjudged the distance for a killing blow, or he might have only intended it as a warning shot in the first place. It is clear, however, that he sees Will as a threat, if not an outright enemy. We learn a lot in the next several scenes. Here is where we learn that robots keep their processors in their upper half and their power cores in their lower half. The body parts have the ability to seek each other out and reattach. There is the first suggestion that the robots can't directly hear radio waves, when a robot acts surprised when Will's audio picks up the alien ship signal, like that was the first time he'd heard it. Now here is also a critical time period for character development for Robot and his species as a whole. Everything that happens next happens before Robot forms the empathic bond with Will. So all of the robot's actions, from the time he takes that first swipe at Will in the tree to the time he moves the fragment of the ship to let Will at the ball, all of that is 100% pure robot. Will is not having any influence on that. First, Robot didn't have the power to thermal blast Will, so clearly that's why he didn't heat blast him, but he did take that swipe at him, tearing Will's coat. Again, he could have easily killed Will, but he didn't, suggesting that the gesture was defensive, not aggressive. Robot shows curiosity and surprise when Will's radio picks up the signal from his ship. Most importantly to his character development, he expresses wonder at the butterfly, and the creators make a point to drawing a comparison between Will's reaction of wonder and Robot's reaction of wonder. They are both curious and fascinated. Robot seems to begin to communicate with Will once he is sure Will is not a threat. When Will asks what's going on, he draws Will's attention to his failing lower section. And Robot shows genuine surprise when Will goes to save him. Then the robot saves Will in turn. Now this might have been a sense of justice, of gratitude, or pure pragmatic calculation on the robot's part. He shows a solid understanding of English from the start, and Will has revealed that he's off-planet as well as the robot, so Robot must know that Will probably has access to a ship. Robot's action might have been to gain access to the ship rather than something more altruistic. That might explain him saving Will, but it wouldn't explain the care he shows in the process. He doesn't just snatch Will up. He picks Will up carefully and cradles him gently, making sure to support all the primary and secondary levers of Will's body. As soon as they are out of immediate danger, the robot alters his own body shape to be less distressing to Will. He displays that he has a solid understanding of complex concepts when he leads Will back to his family and rescues Judy. In order for him to have pulled off that rescue, he had to know exactly how much heat to use to melt the ice while not boiling Judy alive or damaging her suit. He instantly calculated how warm he had to keep the Robinsons to prevent them from either freezing or burning. He either has fantastic sensors, trained medical levels of analysis, or he already had access to a lot of data about humans. He would need that solid understanding of human biological tolerances and human languages to do what he did in this scene. Again, at this point, everything he's done, except for how tender he's been while doing it, could still be self-serving. He then proceeds to help them get down to the ship and free the Jupiter. He too needs to get off the planet after all. And again, he shows that eerie knowledge of the material limits of the Jupiter. At no point does he burn or melt anything. He is either a material sciences expert, or he already knew what the limits of the Jupiter were. He then quickly picks up on all the various tasks that need to be done on the Resolute to get it out of the ice and helps as best he can, again displaying a solid understanding of all of the materials that Jupiter is made out of, using just enough heat to evaporate the water without damaging the ship. Another interesting data point is that Robot reacts to John's rather hostile interests and questions with a relaxed demeanor. This might mean that he simply doesn't see John as a threat, or that he does not recall any reason to consider John an enemy. The next suggestion that he actually has amnesia is when he won't lead them to his crashed ship. The fact that he does nothing to stop them from finding the ship suggests that he can't. He then shows almost no interest in investigating the crashed ship, seeming more content to just play with Will. And remember, he still doesn't have his telepathic bond with Will at this point. An interesting thing to remember is that he shares nothing with Will at this point, and yet he takes no active steps to reconnect with the ship. If he knows he is missing memories, he does not seem aware that touching the ship will restore them. Then he casually touches the ship to allow Will to retrieve the dropped ball. The broken scrap of the ship forms a connection between Will and the robot, allowing Will to experience a memory of the attack on the ship firsthand, which is going to be pretty traumatic for a 12-year-old boy. Now here's the odd thing. The robot seems to be experiencing it for the first time as well. This might be an indicator of his memory loss, or an indicator that the memory wasn't his. Perhaps his shock was just from the fact that he was experiencing Will's shock, human emotions, for the first time. All we know is that the bond forms here, well after Robot has established himself as a sentient sapient being. So Will's influence on Robot's core personality was not nearly as strong as we were thinking during the first episode. Remember what I said about the oddity in the timeline. We don't know that only one ship and Robot attacked the Resolute in that first incursion. We do know that the ships apparently have the ability to form telepathic bonds. And if Robot Robinson is a pilot, it makes sense that he'd still be on the ship when it was sucked through the wormhole. The memory might have been a fragment of whatever Robot was actually after Scarecrow's engine, the sort of Marine's boots-on-the-ground type. as to why the attacking robot didn't finish going after Scarecrow's engine. Scarecrow had already showed at this point a willingness to defend the engine and the colonists, and the attacking robot might have decided that retrieving his own pilot, Robot Robinson, and their engine had a higher priority than fighting Scarecrow for his, especially given that the attacking robot would have had no idea how weak Scarecrow actually was at this point. Robot Robinson's ship was sending out some kind of, presumably a distress or homing signal this entire time. Presumably it was weakened by the crash, and that was why it took the other robots so long to find him. Will assumes that the memories are robots, but as the audience, we really can't trust Will's assessment of the robot's thoughts other than the robot's instinct to do Will no harm and take care of him. Other than knowing that the robot is his friend, Will has time and time again misinterpreted what the robot was trying to do or the meaning the robot was trying to get across. For instance, Will assumes that Robot will obey his every command, despite that being proven wrong in the Eel episode just a bit later. Right up to the end of Season 2, in fact, Will is shown to be very wrong about Robot's intentions and meanings. Will assumes that Robot's willingness to step off the cliff in that episode shows absolute obedience even unto death, but we've already seen Robot navigate far more difficult cliffs while carrying Will. So Robot clearly understands how cliffs work. He knows his own limits. So we can't just assume along with Will that Robot was being blindly obedient. Robot is clearly working his own agenda. It just happens to be that his agenda develops into protecting Will and bonding with the Robinsons. Over the next several episodes, Robot's character is gradually revealed. He does seem tied to Will on an empathic level, as we can tell from the Eel episode, but from the first time he shows he is neither blindly following Will's spoken orders or even limiting himself to Will's internal wishes. The scene where he locks Will in the closet suggests that Robot Robinson can be overwhelmed by Will's emotions, at least at first, as logic would dictate that letting John get in to get the wrench would improve Will's safety in the long run. And the robot does have that level of logic. He should have been able to figure that out on his own, but he was overwhelmed in that instance. He shows far more logic when he prints out that gun. He wouldn't have seen John try to print it out. John wouldn't have done that in front of him. Robot Robinson would have had to go down to the cargo bay by himself, suggesting he was exploring. He would have had to interface with the printer, suggesting he knew what a printer was and how to use it. He would have had to determine what Will needed to protect himself from the threats on the planet. He would have had to override the printer's safety mechanisms, hacking the printer. He would have to print out the weapon without anyone notice and get it to Will. That shows intuitive logic and reasoning, even forethought. This suggests he was investigating the Jupiter 2, or again, that he already knew a lot about it. Then Robot goes out of his way to warn Will about the danger of what is presumably Robot's own home system. Literally, the first chance Robot has to communicate something complex, it's to stay away from this place. Then he shows more emotional responses when he reacts to the flowers, to the glowing jellyfish, to successfully scaring off the moth chomper. He shows wonder, curiosity, exuberance, joy. However, he showed many of those same emotions before his bond with Will, reacting both to the butterfly and Will himself with wonder, curiosity, and compassion. So again, these elements were inherent in Robot's makeup, not something that the bond with Will initiated, though it might have been something that the bond with Will brought to the fore. In the cave, Robot shows that he has a desire to be part of the Robinson social group, and that he fears rejection. It's shown when Dr. Smith confronts him about this, and she outlines how dangerous humans can be when they're afraid of something. He shows that the idea of the Robinsons rejecting him distresses him. And then Robot shows the empathic over a distant bond when he responds to Will's summons to defend them from the moth chompers, and a willingness to go along with the rules, the social rules that Will has been teaching him by trying to do so non-violently. And he does this at the cost of rather severe damage to himself. But then, once Will assures him that it's okay to do violence to defend himself, he breaks into successful violence, and this is we get a very interesting display. He seems to have a battle rage. Now, Robot 2 has taken quite a bit of damage. This might be brain damage, but it seems that his battle rage stage seems to be overwhelming. He goes into a fight mode that is very hard to come down from, almost as if something was overriding his logic and reasoning capacity. Again, there's the second time we've seen that theme, something overriding the robot's logic. This seems to be more than just obeying Will, as the show, however, establishes that Robot isn't bound by either Will's orders or his emotions. This is the behavior of a member of a social species, this trying to fit into a given social group, to follow their rules, to find that mix of violence and the need to protect the innocent and the small, and balancing that with the need to be peaceable within your own social group. Will is simply, at this point, Robot's closest point of contact, the one he's able to learn the most from. Then Dr. Smith tricks Robot into defending himself, and Will orders Robot to walk off the cliff. Now, presumably, again, like I say, Robot knew his own limits. He might have known that this might not have been a death sentence for him, but it was exile from the community he had tried to join, and that is often psychologically just as bad as death for a social being. And having shown that he is not bound by Will's orders as we were assuming when we watched this episode, the only logical conclusion is that he agreed with Will's assessment, that it was best for him to be out of the picture. Presumably, he agreed that he was too dangerous to be with the rest of the humans. After Dr. Smith puts Robot back together again, however, he spent presumably a decent amount of time hooked up to the ship, but not hooked up to Dr. Smith as far as we could tell. He had started restoring himself, and she didn't appear to have touched him or the ship during this process. She just kicked his arm onto the plate. Presumably, this is when he downloaded all of the memories as he reboots and cured his amnesia. Everyone assumes that he's under Dr. Smith's control during the next hour or so. However, his succeeding behavior makes little sense as being under Dr. Smith's control, and far more sense that he went with his full memories restored. He was working towards his own agenda. He retrieves the engine and gets it back to the Jupiter 2 as soon as possible. While retrieving the engine, he saw and reacted to not one but two separate alien ships approaching the nameless planet and the Resolute. Neither Dr. Smith nor Marine were in the ship when that happened, in the command area, so they wouldn't have seen it. So at that point, Robot is the only one that knows that the aliens are honing in on the Resolute. He appears to be trying to keep the Robinsons out of the cargo bay where he left the engine just a little bit later, and just before Shar shows up, Robot Robinson appears to try to communicate something to Will through a high five. Appears to be trying to convince Will that they're still friends. But unfortunately, at that point, that Marine starts getting creative with the grappling arm and starts knocking him around. Marine succeeds in ejecting Robot from the Jupiter, only for him to lead Sar back in moments later. Interestingly, this is the first and only time another robot had entered the human ship through the airlock instead of punching a hole in the wall, suggesting very strongly the robot convinced Sar to use the door to protect the integrity of the Jupiter and protect the Robinsons. The next scene is very telling indeed. When Robot Robinson climbs back into the ship, he still has a blue face. We know the ships have the ability to form a bond that allows one partner to communicate empathically with the other partner, and it allows one member of the bond to overwhelm the other member of the bond with their intentions. Robot Robinson has already shown that he can be at least temporarily overwhelmed, his higher logic processes taken over by his bond partner's intent, and Will has had no training. In this short scene, Sar makes an aggressive gesture at Robot, and suddenly Robot's faceplate instantly transforms to match Sar's exactly, after which Robot immediately points out the location of the engine. This is very suggestive that there is some sort of controlling aspect to this bond, that Sar might have been perhaps a member of Robot's crew belonging to the same ship, but having higher rank, he's able to control Robot this way. But we don't know that. Again, that's more speculation, but it definitely implies a sort of control. Now, Sar retrieves the engine and moves to kill Will. This is interesting. Will is already leaking oxygen at that point. Sar had the engine. Sar had Robot. Why did Sar go out of his way to kill Will? Why was Will so important? And to make things even more interesting, Will was literally tied to the wall. Had SAR simply left, Will would have died in moments. Now, here's a little theory I will go into more later. I've been trying to avoid as much speculation as I can, but I couldn't resist this one. I think SAR was Robot's original bond partner, as it were. The ship forms and maintains these bonds. That's why SAR would see Will Robinson as the greatest threat on the Jupiter, as an interloper into this bond, and why Robot would be able to break SAR's hold on him. Robot would have had two competing bonds at that point. SAR would have felt this, felt Robot resisting, and moved to eliminate the problem. That's why SAR went for Will Robinson, not Maureen or the two girls. And note that Robot does not attempt to harm SAR at first. He simply physically moves SAR away from Will, even though he had a perfect chance to get the drop on SAR. Then SAR seems to decide that Robot's a problem and attacks SAR with a fairly clear intent to kill or at least incapacitate. Robot then gets SAR away from the Robinsons by force as fast as possible. After this, events get cloudy again, because we only get to see them through the memories of the colonists. Robot and SAR burst onto the Resolute through a wall, and Robot then is seen protecting the colonists on the Resolute, keeping SAR away from him. At some point, Robot and possibly SAR makes it to, or is brought to, the engine room where Scarecrow is kept. Now, we don't know what happened in that engine room, other than for two facts. We really only have 2 data points. We know that at one point, Robot touched the steering control, leaving a very hand-shaped print in a very hard material. And Scarecrow's engine was stolen. At some point, either Robot, SAR, or Scarecrow then jumps the Resolute to the home system after the Jupiter 2. Presumably, Robot's engine did the jump first because it had a homing device that took it to the methane world, when it found itself in space, as far as it knew, without a pilot. This kind of makes sense. If something happens to the robot pilot, the ship jumps home. Here, Scarecrow's engines and SAR's ship, however, disappear. Remember, there were 2 alien ships that approaching the Resolute when Robot Robinson removed his engine from the crashed ship and loaded it onto the Jupiter. And presumably, SAR stole Scarecrow's engine out of the Resolute. SAR's own ship might be back over the Nameless Planet, not having made it through the rift, but there were 2 ships, and one of them should have been able to follow the Resolute and the Jupiter through. So what happened to the second alien ship? What did SAR do with Scarecrow's engines? Who made the jump to the danger system, Robot, Scarecrow, or SAR? How did SAR and Robot get off the Resolute? How did they make it to the Amber Planet? Why the Amber Planet and not the Methane Planet? We haven't seen evidence that the robots can just free fall down to a planet's surface, so it looks like that Robot and SAR had to have had some sort of ship to get down there, but then where did the ship go? And again, where did Scarecrow's engine go? Neither robot had received anything in the way of proper medical care by the time they were found again 7 months later. Robot Robinson is still burnt and crispy from where SAR cooked him, and SAR is still missing the arm Robot ripped off. With a ring of healing right there, and the other robots, this suggests that SAR and Robot probably did not want to make contact with the Amber Planet robots. This might suggest that they're different factions, or it might suggest any number of things, including that SAR was freaked out that the rest of the robots would do something to Robot Robinson permanent and was trying to protect him. We actually know very little about SAR's and Robot Robinson's relationship. Scarecrow is left to die on the Resolute without his engine, even though SAR and Robot presumably got off with the ship. So this makes me highly doubtful that this was at any point ever a rescue mission for Scarecrow. As the engine and the ship seem to be the source of Robot's healing, it isn't far to stretch to say that removing the engine might have led to Scarecrow's seemingly sudden decay and near death. Scarecrow was wandering the Resolute, following any noise he could find, until John and Maureen lured him back into the engine room. Maybe he was looking for his engine. While all the humans assumed he was following them to do violence, there's no actual evidence of that. His face was red, but that seems to be a permanent aspect of his state of damaged and dying systems, and it's not like they found any cooked animals around the Resolute, which probably would have happened if Scarecrow really had been on a mindless rage like they assumed. Adler stated that Scarecrow was unwilling or unable to interface with Robot's engine. He assumed it was because he was asking too complex a task. However, could it be that the Methane Planet engines are incompatible with the Amber Planet robots and vice versa? Will meanwhile has some success talking to Scarecrow and gets Scarecrow to accept SAR's extra arm, which does suggest that the robot parts are interchangeable between the Methane Planet robots and the Amber Planet robots, which is interesting. Then Scarecrow seems to snap for no reason and try to attack Will, which Adler later reveals is what happened to him. Will does manage to charm Scarecrow enough that Scarecrow points out the robot-shaped handprint on the steering controls, which allows Will to form a powerful enough empathic bond with Robot to see what Robot is seeing, in the same way that Robot's been able to see what Will has been seeing. Whether this is because Robot left some sort of empathic imprint on the engine control when he touched it, or whether the ship part simply has that empathy boosting function naturally, is impossible to say. The next scene seems to indicate that Robot left some trace of his energy in the steering controls, or it's simply that the presence of even an Amber Planet ship would allow for the strengthening of the bond. The next few scenes are where we hear Adler suggesting that he and Scarecrow were friends until something caused Scarecrow to snap. This might even imply that Scarecrow was willingly transporting the colonists, being their pilot, until something made him balk. Again, the only time Robot refused to take the colonists somewhere was when he knew it would bring danger either to the colony or Earth, which makes one wonder if what caused Scarecrow to balk was realizing that SAR and Robot were getting closer to finding the Resolute, closer to following the Resolute home. Perhaps that's why he jumped so far. Interestingly, we next meet SAR on the planet. SAR, who seems to understand English and understand human perception and psychology enough to convince Will he's Robot Robinson. And SAR wants to understand what happened in that tree when Robot and Will met. SAR is perfectly willing to off Marine Robinson, but needs Will alive. Presumably he wants to know about this bond that was able to disrupt his bond with Robot. Then Adler scraps him, and Will finds Robot, who is still in his humanoid form and very happy to see Will. Robot shows a strong but unreadable reaction to seeing SAR dead. And we can't tell what he's feeling other than that he does not feel responsible for this death. We can tell that because when Gypsy dies because of Robot's actions, Robot does the cairn building ceremony that John Robinson taught him and Will. Robot was taking responsibility for Gypsy's deaths. Because he doesn't do that for SAR, I think we can safely assume that Robot feels no specific guilt over what happened to SAR, but that's about all we can tell. Then they move on, and Robot forms his first emotional bond with a horse, which is very interesting and leads to the scene where he shows a strong negative reaction to Gypsy's bit. Robot clearly is having a strong reaction to the thought of a device used to control someone who's considered a friend. Now, this might be his reaction to seeing the steering controls on the Resolute, or if you recall the scene when SAR first shows up on the Jupiter and SAR's face display formed an oval, probably a representation of the engine, and Robot suddenly altered to make it exactly just before Robot showed him where the engine was. Then Robot has to shake his head to clear the colors from red to blue again. Robot might have more personal reasons for hating control devices other than just seeing how the Resolute was controlling Scarecrow, especially if he just spent the past 7 months with SAR trying to reestablish the bond and reestablish SAR's control over him. That would give a lot more depth to his strong negative reaction to the bit. Then you have the scene where Robot shows that he's learned to take responsibility for his actions, manning up as it were, when he performs the cairn building ceremony when Gypsy dies, and incidentally when Will almost died due to Robot's impulsive actions. He then keeps the bridle as a reminder, probably of what he did, the friend he'd made and lost, and the mistake he'd made. Then Robot gets back to the Resolute. For quite some time he is busy helping the colonists prepare the Resolute for the jump back to Alpha Centauri. Robot, during this time, must be well aware that Scarecrow is on the ship and in bad shape. but he simply goes about transferring his engine from the Jupiter 2 to the Resolute's engine room and preparing for departure. It isn't until several hours later, well into the mutiny, that he suddenly decides to rescue his friend. Why this sudden change? Now, in the room where Scarecrow was sitting in his cage, the guards are shocking him, but in the background you can hear them saying that he was trying to escape. The dying Scarecrow, who had simply been lying slack in his cage, had at the same time that Robot abruptly changed course and decided that Scarecrow was his friend. Scarecrow had been trying to escape, almost as if they were both responding to some signal at the same time, possibly the alien ships approaching. And when Robot Robinson pulls the dying Scarecrow out, they stare at each other with red faces. But Robot's face goes back to blue when he looks at Will, almost as if Robot was reacting aggressively not to the humans who were mistreating Scarecrow, but to Scarecrow himself, which is odd. Robot then insists on helping Scarecrow before getting the colony back to Alpha Centauri. Now, getting the colony back to Alpha Centauri was something Robot was perfectly willing to do when he first arrived on the ship. And Robot had been in that control room with Scarecrow before. He knew Scarecrow was there. He knew how bad off Scarecrow was. He was still willing to jump the Resolute home, knowing all of that. Something changed in those hours that changed Robot's priorities. At the same time, something changed that freaked out Scarecrow. The only thing that makes sense is that they were detecting and reacting to the approaching alien ships. Robot gets Scarecrow, Will, and Adler to the Jupiter 2, convinces Adler to help Scarecrow, and then lets himself get captured. Robot doesn't even try to make it onto the Jupiter 2, which he could have done because, after all, Adler had just pointed out that they really could not capture a fully functional robot against its will. Robot could have incapacitated the guards, but instead he goes with the guards and allows himself to be hooked up to the controls, only objecting when he is ordered to leave Will behind. Meanwhile, Scarecrow is taken down and restored by the lightning, seemingly awakening a bevy of his fellow Amber Planet robots. Those robots board a ship and attack the Resolute. Scarecrow does not come with the initial attack force, however. He would have been obvious in the magnetic trap room, being a distinctly different gold color from the rest of the silver-colored aliens. So he might have come up on the ship with them and just stayed behind, but where was he from the time the ship docked on the Resolute to when he showed up to save Will and the rest of the children? Maybe he came up on the Jupiter, hiding on the Jupiter somewhere, but through that time, one imagines he was probably assessing the situation. While the robots were trapped, he wouldn't have been needed, and he might have been just figuring out what was going on. Then, Robot makes the decision to prep the Jupiter for departure, and let Will deal with the aliens on his own, showing that even if he doesn't like it, he's treating Will like an adult. Now remember, this is all after Robot quite happily agreed with the plan to straight up murder the several dozen aliens who are presumably also from the Amber Planet, therefore probably Scarecrow's allies, right after throwing a fit over Scarecrow's treatment and calling Scarecrow a friend. So, why would Robot put so much effort into rescuing Scarecrow and then just straight up be okay with murdering nearly 100 other robots who are presumably Scarecrow's allies? Interesting. So then Robot lets Will go out and face the silver Amber Planet robots on his own, showing that Robot's character has developed to the point that he has larger priorities than just taking care of his immediate family. Now, the attacking robots were atomized with the Resolute, because Scarecrow stood there and fought them off until the Jupiter 8 had a chance to get away. However, Scarecrow was still moving and within reasonable distance of several Jupiters when we last saw him, so it's safe to say that the show won't be letting that CGI model go to waste, and we'll probably be seeing Scarecrow again. He's stuck in the same system with the adult humans, and is probably persona non grata on his homeworld as well as Robot's world at this point. So, some points to ponder. Every time Robot Robinson defied an order, it was with the goal of keeping Will and the rest of the colonists safe from threats they couldn't detect. Scarecrow showed two very telling moments of character development. First, when he jumped the Resolute away from the attacking robots, neither to Earth or Alpha Centauri, which would have endangered those worlds, but to an uninhabited world that could not only support life, but provide the Jupiter with everything they needed to take back off again. Then, the moment he is healed and in his right mind, he jumps in and takes on dozens of other robots to protect the Resolute. It is reasonable to assume that the defiance he showed during the voyages before this was to protect the colonists from an unseen threat, probably the methane planet robots getting closer and closer to finding them with every trip. Because presumably his ship was sending out that crash distress signal as well. So, that is what we've been able to gather about the robots so far, with a little bit of speculation thrown in there. I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to correct any mistakes in the comments below. I know I'm missing some things, or leave your own observations about something you noticed. So, peace out, my wonderful viewers. Leave a like and a comment, and I will talk to you later.